In early 2026, a sudden military strike across Iran pushed the global system to the brink. Within 3 weeks, oil prices surged past $115. Commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz faced severe disruption, and billions of people absorbed the immediate shock of inflation and supply chain collapse. U.S. President Donald Trump responded to the initial strikes by framing the operation as a personal victory, prioritizing an image-preserving victory and the rhetoric of winning over long-term diplomacy. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu adopted a similar posture, employing definitive, aggressive rhetoric. By describing Iran as decimated, the messaging projected absolute dominance rather than leaving room for diplomatic off-ramps. On the other side, the Iranian hardline establishment, led by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, prioritized regime honor and public perception of strength over strategic delay, guaranteeing immediate missile retaliations. These behaviors are measurable manifestations of the dark triad. This framework groups 3 interrelated personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. In high-stakes environments, each trait performs a specific function. Narcissism drives an inflated self-image and an obsession with personal legacy. Machiavellianism enables cynical, strategic manipulation. Psychopathy contributes impulsivity, a profound lack of empathy, and an absence of remorse for the human cost of decisions. Modern organizational and political systems consistently elevate individuals with these traits. This happens because our hiring and electoral pipelines contain a structural flaw. They mistake maladaptive psychological traits for highly valued leadership signals. Grandiosity mimics charisma. Callousness is misread as decisiveness under pressure. While these individuals project an illusion of competence in the short term, their sustained presence in leadership roles reliably produces institutional decay, toxic work cultures, and the deliberate prolongation of conflict. Geopolitical crises are the predictable, emergent properties of unregulated psychological pipelines that reward personal ego over collective welfare. To understand why these traits recur across generations of leadership, we have to look past observable behavior and examine the biological substrate of personality. Recent behavioral research identifies a higher-order structure underlying the dark triad, known as the D factor. This is a common core of personality, characterized by deep antagonism and a persistent self-serving orientation. This chart breaks down the variance of these traits based on data derived primarily from twin studies. The genetic signal is remarkably strong for 2 of the dimensions. Additive genetics accounts for roughly 64% of the variance in psychopathy and 59% of the variance in narcissism. Machiavellianism exhibits a different profile. Additive genetics explains only 31% of the variance, while the shared environment, which includes family-wide factors like parenting and cultural upbringing, contributes 39%. Across all 3 charts, a large portion of the variance remains empty until we account for the non-shared environment. This metric represents the unique personal experiences, traumas, and external shaping in individual encounters outside their family structure. This high non-shared environment value is critical. It proves that despite strong genetic components, these traits remain highly malleable through gene-environment interactions. Biology provides a risk predisposition. Behavior remains a product of developmental history and environmental influence. Because the dark triad is biologically predisposed but environmentally plastic, the development of these destructive leadership traits is highly responsive to external shaping, particularly during early education. Before reaching the global stage, these personalities must survive institutional filters. Selection processes like structured interviews, like boardroom negotiations, and public political campaigns serve as the gates to power. These systems possess a severe blind spot. Interviewers consistently misinterpret the grandiosity of narcissism as compelling organizational vision, and the callousness of psychopathy as the bold resolve needed for crisis management. This graph illustrates the performance timeline of a dark triad leader. Once hired, they often generate an immediate inversion of expectations. Perceived performance spikes sharply as the leader pushes aggressive strategies and acts decisively, yielding short-term gains like sudden revenue growth. But the long-term organizational reality, documented in meta-analytic studies by researchers like O'Boyle, paints a different picture. Systemic health plummets drastically over time as the leader's manipulative and self-serving tactics begin to erode the surrounding infrastructure. Psychologists measure this systemic decay through counterproductive work behaviors. These are intentional actions by employees that actively harm the organization, driven by the toxic environment created at the top. The specific damages are measurable and severe: spikes in workplace bullying, the deliberate hiding of critical knowledge, widespread emotional exhaustion, and high turnover rates among staff. Crucially, traits at the CEO level do not remain isolated in the executive suite. A leader with high Machiavellianism actively reshapes the dynamics of the entire top management team, replacing trust with suspicion and collaboration with zero-sum competition. This toxicity flows downward through the hierarchy. It normalizes unethical conduct, encourages abusive supervision at the middle management level, and teaches employees that strategic deceit is a viable path to promotion. Standard leadership selection systems fail because they are actively optimized to reward short-term dominance at the explicit cost of long-term institutional survival. When this toxic organizational cascade scales up to the geopolitical level, the stakes shift from corporate turnover to human survival. The 2026 conflict scenario provides the operational model for this exact failure. The cognitive mechanics of ego-driven escalation are rigid. When a leader possesses high narcissism and low empathy, they process diplomatic compromise as an attack on their self-worth. Policy disagreements become psychologically personalized. A leader fixated on image preservation will view measured restraint as personal humiliation, preferring to initiate military or economic shocks rather than accept an outcome that suggests weakness. This network map visualizes the mechanism that infects the broader population: affective polarization. This occurs when citizens adopt extreme, hostile emotional responses toward opposing groups, driven by the rhetoric and behavioral cues of a central leader node. A 2025 study by Nye and colleagues analyzed 40 national elections and found a direct link. Supporters of dark triad politicians adopt markedly more hostile attitudes toward opponents, even when the politician's actual ideology aligns with their own. This societal rift strips away the cultural constraints that usually limit destructive behavior. When a leader signals emotional coldness and manipulative division, it normalizes cruelty and norm-breaking across the entire electorate. The psychological environment traps the geopolitical system. The polarized public begins to demand the same strongman posture that created the crisis, creating a self-sustaining escalatory spiral where de-escalation is politically impossible. A single leader's psychological profile acts as a massive global multiplier. It weaponizes millions of followers, turning manageable disputes into existential zero-sum shocks that destabilize the world. Because genetic screening for leaders is ethically unacceptable, intervention must occur entirely at the environmental level, long before individuals reach the gates of power. We achieve this through pedagogical buffering. By designing civilizational education architectures that actively train empathy and emotional regulation, societies can disrupt the dark triad pipeline before high-risk traits solidify. Technical education is insufficient on its own. When schools mandate rigorous emotional intelligence and values training alongside standard academics, they actively downregulate the expression of the genetic D factor. India's National Education Policy 2020 offers a scalable blueprint for this architectural shift by formally integrating the Indian knowledge system into mainstream curriculum. The first core mechanism of this framework is Nishkama karma, which refers to selfless action, or action performed without attachment to personal reward. By training students to separate the execution of their duties from their own ego attachment, the curriculum directly counteracts the narcissistic obsession with image preservation and public validation. The second core mechanism is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, a philosophical tenet meaning the world is one family. Embedding global interdependence into early education explicitly neutralizes the cognitive paradigms of psychopathy and Machiavellianism. It replaces the low-empathy, instrumental view of human beings with a required framework of mutual reliance. History provides a proof of concept. Following the Kalinga War, Emperor Ashoka's own behavioral predisposition for conquest was entirely overridden by the cultural buffering of Ahimsa, or nonviolence. He institutionalized these values across an empire, proving that extreme behavioral trajectories can be redirected by a shift in environmental philosophy. Societies achieve global resilience by engineering developmental systems that socialize future generations to prioritize collective stewardship over personal glory.